damp autumn morning found me driving along a winding dirt road covered in fallen leaves of golden yellow and deep red hues. The path, enveloped in an unsettling hush, twisted through trees whose bare branches formed a tunnel overhead. Although a slight rain continued, scattering droplets across the windshield, the overwhelming silence made my heartbeat thunder in my ears. Far off at the road's end, Grimwood Mansion loomed, its silhouette as imposing as any legend I'd half remembered from childhood. Now, summoned by my grandfather's will, I had no choice but to return here. I carefully maneuvered my car into a gravel-strewn yard, its muddy patches threatening to trap the wheels. When the engine died, a profound stillness replaced the hum. Raindrops tapped against the window in a faint pattern, yet I sensed that even the land itself stood unnervingly quiet. Grimwood Mansion's facade, its moss-covered walls, partially collapsed turrets, and shattered windows, showed decades of neglect. As a child, I had heard hushed tales of the mansion's dangers and mysteries, but I had never taken them seriously. Now, a twist of fate brought me back under this shadowy roof, stirring a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. My footsteps crunched over damp gravel, each sound magnified in the emptiness of the courtyard. Leafless trees seemed to watch over me, their branches trembling in the light rain. Reaching the entrance, I fished the old keys from my pocket. Their cold metal hinted at a hidden history lying dormant for years. I let my gaze linger on the intricate carvings of the massive wooden door, partially rusted hinges reflecting its age. A firm push with the iron knocker sent echoes rolling through the mansion's interior. No one would answer, of course, but the ritual steadied my nerves momentarily. Using the key, I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the smell of mildew and dampness. The vast entry hall, once adorned with shining chandeliers, now lay dark and choked with dust. Black and white checkered tiles spread across the floor, some fractured by age and tangled with moss. Solitary portraits of relatives long gone hung on the walls, their features blurred, yet still harboring stern and watchful eyes. A great hush dominated every corner, pierced only by the faint whistle of wind through cracks in the masonry. I recalled the notes in my grandfather's journal, which hinted at unusual phenomena that had plagued Grimwood Mansion for generations. Phantom footsteps, inexplicable silhouettes, and unanswered voices in the night. What most concerned me, however, was the mention of a mirror. According to my grandfather, this mirror was far from ordinary. He believed it bent time and space, acting as a doorway between past and future, somehow binding itself to the mansion's spirit. I had no idea what I'd discover here, but I felt compelled to stand face to face with whatever secrets lay hidden. In the center of the hall stood a mirror of imposing height and breadth, its presence overshadowing every other relic of the mansion's glory days. The frame was hewn with complex carvings and grotesque shapes, places where gilding had flaked off, revealing worn patches of wood and metal. Even in this dim, shadow-filled environment, the surface of the mirror shimmered with a quiet allure. As I approached, I saw my own reflection waver, as though I were peering into dark water. A faint ripple caught my eye. I blinked, gone. My reflection remained, pale and uncertain, overshadowed by an unsettling feeling of being watched. Determined to explore further, I took a small flashlight from my bag and scanned the adjoining rooms. The gloom revealed itself slowly. Furniture lost to mold, broken statuettes scattered on the floor, toppled books bleeding dust. Everywhere, wooden beams threatened to give way beneath the weight of neglect. In this stagnant air, I could almost sense the mansion breathing, as if it possessed a consciousness that wove through every corridor and corner. Leaving the main hall behind, I ascended a sweeping staircase, its old wooden steps creaking alarmingly. Each footfall raised small storms of dust, illuminated by the weak daylight that seeped through ruined windows. On the upper level, a narrow corridor was lined with locked doors, some slightly ajar. I cautiously opened one, revealing what had once been a study. Papers lay strewn across the floor, jars of dried ink and tarnished quills telling of a long abandoned life. A battered desk lamp still bore the Grimwood family crest. I recognized its emblem, but had never learned its meaning, suspecting it spoke of a deeper narrative the family never openly discussed. Searching the study, I uncovered a few more of my grandfather's notes detailing the strange powers of the mirror. "It is more than an object," he had written. "It warps the lines of time, offering glimpses of bygone ghosts or future echoes." Other passages described shadowy figures dancing in the mirror at night, possibly missing members of the family or unfortunates caught in the mansion's web. Each sentence only fueled my unease. A faint rustle outside the door made me whip my flashlight toward the hallway, but I found it empty. I moved on, creeping down the corridor. Several doors wouldn't budge. Others led to disintegrating bedrooms. In one, I glimpsed a smaller version of the main mirror's ornate frame, shattered and abandoned on the floor. It occurred to me that the house might hold multiple reflections of the same ominous design, each serving as a fragment of some greater whole. Eventually, it became impossible to resist the pull, drawing me downstairs again toward the colossal mirror. The mansion's labyrinth seemed devised to funnel me right back to it. Returning to the hall, I found the mirror waiting in the dark, a dormant portal to unknown realms. I lit a candle, the flickering glow highlighting carved beasts and swirling lines along the gilded edges. Observing more closely, I sensed the carvings themselves told a story. One of savage creatures on one side, frightened humans on the other, and strange symbols bridging them in the center. At that moment, the reflective surface shivered once more. Steeling myself, I refused to look away. The surface went dim, then shapes emerged. A grand ballroom, people in old-fashioned clothing swirling to a distant melody. Their laughter was fleeting. The lights dimmed, and a hush spread as shadows eclipsed their faces. A final shriek shattered the scene, leaving the mirror as a silent pane of darkness. My heart pounded as I recalled my grandfather's final stories. An exhausted woman carrying a child, lost in the corridors, forever searching for an exit. And then, the mirror glimmered again, this time revealing that very woman frantically trying doors, each leading only to yet another deserted hallway. The dread on her face was unmistakable. I staggered back, breath trembling. Something within me realized that the only way to mend the family's troubled past was to destroy this uncanny reflection. My grandfather had suspected the same. Break the mirror, and the mansion's uncanny hold might unravel. Aware of the possible collapse, but seeing no alternative, I moved from room to room in search of a tool. At last, in an old storage closet, I found a heavy iron bar thick enough to damage the frame. Holding it tight with shaking hands, I returned to the hall where the mirror towered, looking almost sentient. Summoning courage, I slammed the iron bar against it. Cracks laced across the surface and the ornate carvings groaned as though alive. A second blow splintered the central glass, spiderwebbing outward. I felt the floor quake beneath my feet, the walls trembling in protest, dust cascading from the rafters. With the third impact, the mirror gave a final, deafening crack as shards of glass rained down onto the stone floor. In that instant, the entire mansion seemed to roar. Walls crumbled, beams groaned, and the ground shook as though the edifice itself resisted final oblivion. Coughing through swirling dust, I scrambled to exit, nearly blinded by the chaos. I fled down a side corridor, bursting at last into the rear garden. Dizzy with shock, I turned to see the mansion's walls collapsing, shutters snapping away from windows, a dense plume of debris shooting skyward. Gentle raindrops still fell, mixing with the billowing dust. It was both terrifying and strangely cleansing. My family's historic dwelling was reduced to rubble, taking centuries of obscure memories with it. Shakily, I stood in the drenched grass, reflections of the shattered mirror dancing in my mind. If it had once anchored an otherworldly presence, it now lay broken among the ruins. The hush of the countryside returned. A trace of early morning light broke through the clouds, a subtle promise of a fresh start. Even though I felt emotionally drained, I also felt released, unchained from the heavy secrets that had tormented our lineage for so long. Struggling back to my car, I cast a final glance at the wreckage. One day, explorers or historians might sift through these stones, discovering cryptic fragments, yet never grasping the true stories that had haunted this place. For me, though, this was an ending, an unsettling mission completed, a family burden lifted. Putting the car in gear, I drove away, each mile taking me further from the lifeless heart of Grimwood Mansion and closer to a future unclouded by its brooding shadow. No matter what I'd witnessed inside those walls, I had arrived at the realization that confronting fears is often the only way to be free. And in destroying that mirror, I had shattered the last hold the mansion had over me.